Hi, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Brian. I'm part of the Bitcoin Association here in Hong Kong. Today is episode 5, which is a chat with George. Before we proceed with the talk, I think I'm going to give a brief introduction of the Bitcoin Association in Hong Kong. So it was founded in 2014, and it is a place for members to try and understand more about Bitcoin and to connect and try and engage with the community. Throughout our history in the last 6 years, we've been able to see some very well-known individuals like Arthur Hayes moving on to build BitMEX. We've seen Jihan Chu creating Kinetic Capital. And also personally, I've seen some influential people who start out in Hong Kong. And part of my first journey into Bitcoin was actually having a discussion with George. So with George being on this call, I thought, hey, maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation to see the past, the present, and the future. But before we get into that introduction and history of who George is, maybe we can have a little bit of a background as to where we are at this moment, because you're probably wondering with the background, where are we? And maybe John, who is part of Genesis Block, is going to be able to give a little bit of an introduction.
Oh, hi, I'm John from Genesis Block. I'm the CMO. We are Hong Kong's premier OTC trade center. And we promote a lot of education, and we publish books like with Brian. Yeah, and we've been here since 2017, going strong.
Thanks, John. I guess what we can do now is to give a little bit tour of Genesis Block behind the scenes. So I'm going to give a quick little 360-degree view. This is the behind the scenes. John's actually in that room. Hello, how are you? Hi. Oh, there you are, John.
I'll mention that.
Hi. So you can see there's two people here that's very focused. For obvious reasons, we're not going to be asking what they're doing, but you can see that they've got a pretty cool setup over here. So thank you, John and Genesis Block, for allowing us to use your space and being able to be behind the scenes at this moment. So without further ado, George, welcome. Thank you for joining. This is episode 5. You've been very instrumental in my journey in trying to understand more about Bitcoin and how to get started. I still remember the first time we met was actually in Jardine Lookout in Central, and we were in the basement of Grappa's, and I knew nothing about Bitcoin in 2017. You were sitting in a corner. There was a whole piece of pizza out there, and you're like, oh, I see you looking at that pizza. Do you want to grab a slice? And I'm like, I don't even know you. You're offering me some pizza. And then we had that discussion about the story of the gentleman who traded, I think, 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 boxes of pizza at that time. And then from that conversation, you just started to share more about why Bitcoin was so important and also more about your startup journey. So the main purpose of today is to really understand more about who you are, George, and how did you come to Hong Kong? But I see that you're wearing a hat, and John and I are both pretty much sweating over here in Hong Kong. So I guess you're not in Hong Kong at this moment, or what's the story like?
No, so I'm, thanks for the intro, Brian, as well. And it's amazing that you remember that pizza story where the pizza still exists, because usually if there's pizza on the table, like I'm already in, I'm all in. It's like, Bitcoin at $10, I'm all in. It's gonna disappear very soon. But no, I'm south of the equator at the moment. So I'm in New Zealand, and it's there's probably frost on the ground outside, and it's like 0 degrees. So it's pretty damn cold at the moment. So I don't know if I would swap it for humid Hong Kong at the moment at 35 or something like that. I don't know about that, but yeah, no, it's good to be on the call today and to have Genesis Block on board, of course.
Thank you so much, George. For those of us that are maybe not familiar with who you are, George, for both myself and John, we know a little bit about your story, your background, but for the people that don't, is there a little bit more context of who George is and what your story is? Because if you're in New Zealand and we're in Hong Kong, there's really no context. Maybe we can start with the context.
Yeah, well, I guess, I can start with how I got into Bitcoin and sort of how things got to where they are at the moment. So I've been in Bitcoin for about 10 years now. So I remember when I was a poor student and I heard about this thing, Bitcoin, in 2011. And, you know, I had a sort of hobby of building computers. So I would sort of build a miner, buy parts off eBay, and just sort of buy whatever GPUs I could, build my own Bitcoin miner, and sort of got into it that way. So, you know, from that, I sort of educated myself about why Bitcoin exists, sound money, you know, a lot of those sort of principles that we associate a lot with the sort of gold and silver community. But yeah, so I started out doing it myself. This was back when you could download, you know, a Bitcoin miner onto your laptop and you could still make money on it. That was the good old days. That was awesome. But no, so I sort of 2011, I started there. Post that, I was probably, well, I was in the first batch of FPGAs in the world. I was in the first batch of ASICs in the world as well. So I pretty much, my roots are in mining, in that, you know, that was something which, from a technical standpoint, I was studying engineering at the time. I thought it was pretty interesting and a cool thing to do. But yeah, so I sort of, you know, I remember Butterfly Labs. Many people might not sort of remember who they are, but Butterfly Labs was the first Bitcoin mining manufacturer that actually sort of, you know, made a product. Previous to that, all Bitcoin mining stuff happened on the forums, and it was like some random dude somewhere, you know, built some piece of software that you ran on some GPUs. So yeah, you know, I sort of started off with them, and sort of after that as well. So let's say 2012 to 2014. You know, I was using all the different exchanges. MTGOX was still the largest at the time. So wiring money between, you know, where I was in Australia and Japan. But when it came to 2014, I was working in a good job back in Australia, but I could see that this Bitcoin thing was something which, you know, it wasn't going anywhere anytime, you know, my current job wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, and I'd like to get into Bitcoin a lot more. So when I sort of found my co-founder for my previous company, Bitspark, we decided to just go and move to Hong Kong and go and start the journey there. So in 2014, I founded a company called Bitspark, based in Hong Kong. And essentially, you know, we were one of the original exchanges in Hong Kong. So second altcoin exchange in all of Asia, first with the multi-sig wallets. There's a lot of different stuff. Literally invented Bitcoin remittances. So that's sort of been our key focus, and that's something which I've been pretty passionate about over the years, was using Bitcoin for a real useful purpose, which is sending money overseas. So developed that company out, and yeah, essentially Hong Kong was the best place to be starting a Bitcoin company. You know, it was back then, and it pretty much still is now. So it's sort of a meeting point for a lot of people in the industry. It is you know, a city where you know, it's all about commerce, and it's all about doing deals. It's all about and you know, there's a lot of crypto people in Hong Kong as well. You got many of the big derivatives exchanges there as well today, and Genesis Block as well. So you know, it is a place to be. So you know, that's why I sort of found my way to Hong Kong, and you know, I think from there there's been a lot of ups and downs along the journey. But it's been a fun time, and I think we're kind of only really just getting started in the next decade. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
Thanks, George, for helping me and the audience to understand more about the past. If maybe we can delve a little bit deeper into the past, because as we're all aware, the situation globally is quite grim at this moment, and hopefully there's some lessons that we can learn from how you got started. So when you first got started, is there something that you might be able to share on how did you first hear about Bitcoin in 2011? And when you're an engineer student, you're still trying to build your business from scratch from 2011 to 2014. Where and how did you start? Who introduced you to this? And what was it like then compared to 2014?
Yeah, I mean, so how did I find Bitcoin? I think everyone comes from different perspectives. Some people get introduced to it by friends. Some people, I don't know, maybe they sort of stumble upon it. They see it in a news article, these sorts of things. But back then, 10 years ago, like there's no news articles. It's just a bunch of nerds on the internet, right? So essentially how I found it was on one of the tech forums. You know, I was pretty active on many of the sort of PC hardware forums on different websites around the world. So, you know, I saw something where it was like, you know, put your, you know, GPU to use and you can make some money from it. So I thought, well, cool, that's pretty good for a student. So I sort of got into it that way. But yeah, I think after you first get into Bitcoin, at least certainly back then, you know, because there's hardly any documentation. I mean, there was maybe one website, there was one forum. There's no massive media companies. There's no plethora of exchanges and places where you can, you know, utilize it for different things, whatever that might be. So, you know, once you, I see Larry there, what's up? So once you get into it, you know, there's a lot of different branches which you can take. And back then exchanges there was literally like 3. So nowadays we don't really think twice when we hear about a Bitcoin exchange, right? There's like hundreds. And it's kind of like, you know, everyone's an exchange. But back then there was literally 3. And, you know, if you're conducting arbitrage between different currencies, like I was in the time between Australian dollars and the US dollar in Japan. So I would wire money to Mt. Gox, buy Bitcoin, and then sell it back in AUD, make 2%, and try and do that cycle maybe 3 times a week. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, certainly in the early days. And even now, there's always new things popping up, which you hadn't really expected would be there. But yeah, I mean, I guess sort of I had a front row seat for a lot of the development of later miners, and then you had the mining pools, and then you had the exchanges, and then you had all of this ICO stuff in 2017, and then you had, you know, whatever else from there on in. But yeah, I hope that answers the origin question a little bit more.
Absolutely. What I'm also trying to connect with is right now there's a great time of uncertainty. And when you were in 2011, trying to find and making sense out of Bitcoin was pretty hard. You're fortunate enough to have an engineering background, but for many of us that might not have a technical background and are still trying to navigate this uncertainty and trying to figure out where and how to contribute, do you have any insights on navigating through the uncertainty to dabbling into Bitcoin to all of a sudden finding your niche for a business? That in-between space of Bitcoin looks interesting to I'm going to found a Bitspark company. Like what's going on in these 3 to 4 years time period where you're still trying to master this very complex topic without support in a community?
Well, yeah, I think the important thing first before you go headlong into anything is to at least try and understand a little bit about it. So a lot of my early years was understanding like, what the hell is this thing, right? And trying to piece together the little different pieces of information that you could from around the place. And I think for anyone that's looking to get into it, like firstly, you've got to start at the fundamentals, right? You've got to understand, you know, what is Bitcoin? What is it about? What's the mission statement? You know, read the white paper, you know, have a look at, you know, okay, you understand perhaps a little bit about how it works. You don't have to understand everything on day one. But from there, then you know, hopefully you can see there's other different areas of which you can look at, whether it's money transfers, you know, there's mining, there's, you know, using it for, there's people where you can buy stuff on Amazon and then get paid a return in Bitcoin. So there's a lot of different things which sort of spurt from that initial sort of understanding of what it is. So I would like, certainly what I did was, you know, I tried to do mining because that was kind of like a zero cost entry, right? It's like, you know, download this piece of software, install it on your computer and click run. And then maybe you'll make these coins. And like, I wasn't using my computer for anything else, and maybe they'll be worth something. So that's cool. You know, you can, you don't have to buy anything. There's not $1,000 minimum that you can do something. So, you know, I tried to at least use the products that they were out there. And I think that's an important thing for today as well, is being able to use all the different products out there. You can pretty quickly find where you think things can be better. So whatever your skill set might be, A, there's tons of companies out there at the moment. B, like, let's say your skill, like my background was in technical, but if you're, say, a non-technical background, the question would be, well, what are these companies doing and what do they need help with? How can I add value? So, it might be a lot of the companies these days, they might have difficulty explaining their value proposition, or, marketing might be a weak point, or maybe it's, I don't know what it is, administration, just being able to know or to itemize your different costs denominated in Bitcoin. That's also a big problem today. So, there is a lot of these different little side problems, which once you understand a little bit about how the industry works, and I would implore people to, go and try as many products as possible, learn about it as much as they can, then maybe, the light bulbs will start going off, or at least you'll be able to think to yourself, I've used this product, I maybe don't think it's that great. How can I improve on it? And, who are the people that I should talk to? And I think it's all about, adding value as well. So certainly when you're running a company, and a Bitcoin company is quite a niche thing. If you're looking to hire people, if you already have that knowledge and understanding and base about what Bitcoin is, like, that is so much better than the general sort of market of people that might be looking for a job, right? Like, that sidesteps a lot of work for the business as well. So if you come into it with this understanding and knowledge about what you're talking about, it makes it so much easier for one of the many different companies out there in Hong Kong that might be looking for a role, or maybe you'd want to get involved somehow. I think that would be a good sort of place to start if you really wanted to get stuck in and start doing stuff in this space.
Thanks for sharing that, George. I think for those of us that are just joining in, whilst we're focusing on the past, and we're trying to focus specifically on the period 2011, 2014, when there wasn't a lot of information available, and we're trying to relate this to right now, because when there is a crisis and a global pandemic going on, there's also tremendous opportunities. And what I'm hearing from you is that you were just playing around to understand more of your hobby. And your hobby was, I'm going to mine. It was very risk-free. You enjoy doing it. And because you had this technical background and a bottle of wine, and I've got a bottle of lemon tea, you eventually were able to then get expertise for 3 or 4 years before you're saying, maybe I should just try and assemble myself with a team. And then from that journey, you were able to find your co-partner, your co-founder. So from 2014, as that being a very pivotal moment, can you share more about how you turned your hobby and you were working your day job to all of a sudden saying, this is the co-founder I'm going to try and work for. This is how I think I'm going to try and solve that problem. How did you go from hobby to startup?
Yeah, I think it's all about, again, trying to find where the gaps are. So, when I was using all of these different products back in the day, many of them, like, they were pretty terrible. They didn't work. They weren't, focused on user experience. There was a lot of areas where they could be improved upon. So I found myself doing a lot of things which I probably shouldn't do manually. Whether it's researching for hours on end or finding this information, and essentially something like that. Eventually, I was spending so much time doing this Bitcoin thing on the side. I would have a browser tab up at my day job, and I would just have Bitcoin stuff on there. I actually installed a bot that traded on empty Gox. So I was there doing my engineering work or whatever, but then I just had this bot in the background trading EMAs. And and then I was like, man, why don't I just do this full time? Like, I'm spending so much time and effort on this space to begin with. Like, let's try and make it into something real. So I think, again, what many entrepreneurs that might be looking to get into this space, they would have an idea, they would have an approach, they would see how things haven't worked the way that they should, or some area which they think could be improved upon. And then just go and do it. Because, I think half the problem is, yeah, you can strategize about what you want to do and this kind of stuff, but ultimately you've just got to get out there and do it. And that's something that, certainly being in Hong Kong, starting, a business back in the day, like, we found what we thought worked didn't, and we had to pivot and try something else. So you don't get that knowledge sort of sitting at a desk. You've got to actually go and try and do it yourself, and like, yeah, half the journey is in the doing. So so yeah, I would just implore people to immerse themselves in it. You know, try and think about areas of the products which they've used or experiences which they've had, which could be better. And just try and do it. Get something out there. You know, get something out in the world, and you'll get feedback, and you'll build upon that, and then maybe that'll become a thing. So certainly today, when we've got a lot of these resources available, you know, I would say it's better for a beginner, certainly coming into it, because, you know, there's beginner friendly resources, or at least some of them. So, you know, there should be less of a barrier to entry to get into this space now, as opposed to, you know, a while ago, which I think is great. That means more people can sort of, you know, get into the community and get sort of understanding what the tech can do.
Thanks for sharing that, George. In terms of the current situation where you had about 3 years to just try and experiment, you found that you're really obsessed with Bitcoin before you actually started being more engaged. For anyone who might not have that luxury, is there anything that you can look back on and says, oh, maybe I should have spent a little bit more time building a reserve. Maybe I should have done a little bit more preparation work before actually diving in. Is there anything that maybe you can share with anybody listening in to who's considering, I got to be an entrepreneur, I want to be an entrepreneur, but maybe I should minimize my risk by having some cash flow? Or what insights can you share from your earlier days that you wish you knew for anybody who's listening again?
Yeah, well, I mean, back in the day, I didn't know anything. You know, I didn't know what startups are about, how they work, what VC funding was, any of that kind of different stuff, right? So had to kind of learn all of that, you know, on the go. What I would say to people that are looking to get into it now is, like you said, if you can build up some sort of thing on the side, I guess it's kind of similar to what I did, as I did it on the side for a while, but, you know, try and at least test your ideas, you know, on the side in your existing sort of work environment or whatever that might be, and sort of see how things go. If you go, like, you could just go and throw it all away and go, look, I'm just going all in, and I love that. That's fantastic. But I would say that, you know, a good way to test ideas so that you can easily pivot is to try and do a little bit, see how it works. Maybe that's set up a website. You can build websites these days with no code. So, you know, maybe it's an educational resource or something like that, right? You know, you could set that up pretty easily. You know, you can manage it in your off time. Maybe it's some sort of trading idea or something like that. Now, when it comes to technical kind of things that might be more financial in nature, then it comes down to, okay, you're a founder. Either A, you're going to be technical and you can build it yourself, or B, you're not, right? So it's like, where are you going to sit on that spectrum? If the case is that you're not a technical founder, then it's important to try and find someone who can make that vision possible, and you know, try and do it for as most cost economical as possible, right? So you know, how does that work? That's a hard question. Finding a technical co-founder, finding a technical team is not easy, and there's a lot of people with experience in finance, right? There's a lot of, especially in Hong Kong, right? Financial hub, you know, many banks and so on, but that doesn't translate into technical know-how and the ability to execute. So I would say take some time to try and talk to the people in the community who probably are going to be more technically minded. Maybe see if there's some synergies there. And if you can, try and build out something yourself using some of the cool new tools that we have, you know, in 2020, where you can build stuff for no code and just try and sort of get something out there.
Thanks for sharing that, George. I see how you've shared two examples. One way is go all in, just try and be very focused. The other one is the lower risk way, which is to try and just experiment and test. I think one point that you mentioned that really resonated was that Hong Kong is still the financial capital here in Asia. It's still one of the leading places. And when I was looking through some of your videos and how you had sponsors like Simon Dixon, who I highly respect from Back to the Future, and have him and his team invest into you, I'm thinking, how did you manage to get such respectable people to invest into your idea? And when was that pivotal moment where it says, maybe it's time to take outside capital? Because venture capital money, it's almost like marrying a partner. It's very important to choose the right venture capital partner. Can you walk us through more about the decision that you need to have venture capital, and the second part, which is on how you managed to come up with that process, who you vetted in that whole journey?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, as an entrepreneur, often it comes down to, you got to keep the lights on, right? So, you know, in many cases, when we sought, you know, outside funding, it was a case of, you know, I'd made some money in Bitcoin to at least get things started, right? So, you know, there was some money to start the company from what I already had. So I was all in with 100% of my savings. But when it came to the point where you go through that, then it's like, okay, you kind of need to look for outside funding now. So, you know, I would implore everyone to check out what Simon Dixon is doing. He's an awesome guy. He's probably one of the most eloquent speakers in this space. And he runs a fund that essentially invests into Bitcoin companies. But, you know, when you're out there with a brand new idea, it can be tough. You know, you go through 100 different, you know, investors, and many of them just want to meet for coffee and just sort of not really do anything after that. So it's a numbers game. And it's all about trying to meet as many people as possible, try and narrow down who's serious, who's not. That's something that comes in time. And usually for your first rounds, you're talking to angel investors, you're talking to seed funds. They have a specific process, which if you're totally unfamiliar with how that works, you know, I would certainly recommend just have a look at some of the, you know, certainly do your research beforehand, right? Like basically Google is your friend. And that's what I found was, you don't know what some sort of, you know, what is a vesting clause? You know, what is this kind of stuff? Just Google it, try and find out, and you'll eventually get there. Or go and ask entrepreneurs in the community who have already done it. I think that's the key difference now versus, you know, 10 years ago, is that didn't exist. Whereas now you actually have a lot of people, there's a lot of sort of wealth of expertise which you can draw on. You can go to one of these meetups, you can ask these people, hey man, I got this idea, you know, what do you think? What do you think I could do? I think that'd be super important to do, because otherwise you're kind of flying a little bit blind, and especially when the clock is ticking every single day, you've got this internal timer, you know, ticking down of when you're not going to be able to pay for food. Yeah, I think nowadays the tools are a little bit better, but it's still a numbers game. There's still a lot of the traditional sort of financiers won't understand what crypto is all about. And that's just how it is, unfortunately. But the good thing is that there's a lot of crypto focused, you know, outside funding mechanisms as well. So Simon Dixon, a Bank to the Future, is one good example of that, where, you know, their specific focus is on Bitcoin companies, or, you know, blockchain in general, I guess. So the good news is that there are people out there which will understand things, you know, from the get-go. But depending on where you are in the world, that's another important thing as well, is that where you are in the world does matter. If you are perhaps in Silicon Valley, you can get a $5 million check a lot easier perhaps than if you were anywhere in Asia. And that's sort of a realization that we came to, was the venture capital scene is still not as developed in Asia as it is, say, the US, particularly at the early stages. There's just the mentality of sort of the startup scene and stuff there is larger in some areas than others. So the cool thing now is sort of the democratization of funding. Again, that's sort of Bank to the Future kind of thing, but it allows, you know, there's a lot of global first funds. And I think any fund which is in crypto right now, which is worth their salt, is investing globally, because Bitcoin it's a global thing, right? It doesn't exist in one city or one country or whatever. You know, there's just smart people all around the world doing cool stuff, and they need funding. And certainly in markets which are perhaps less developed, a dollar goes a lot further, right? So I think, you know, for investors as well who might be looking at the space, like, look at some of these companies that are coming out of countries of which you would not have thought of, because they can probably get 10 times the runway for the same dollar than some company in, you know, London or New York or whatever. So yeah, I think certainly for us, we found funding was difficult in the early days. I think that's improved a little bit now. with the different people who are specialized in that space now.
On that topic, here's another relatively tough question without much context, but let's say there's two companies. Company A is trying to raise 100 million US dollars, and company B is trying to raise 5 million US dollars. As a CEO of a prominent agile company in Hong Kong, which one would you choose, the 100 million one or the 5 million one, and how would you decide on the variables? If you were to come from the perspective of, if anybody here in the audience is trying to start their own company, how can they walk through the process of, should I raise more money because it looks better with a higher valuation? What am I going to do with the money? Or as a business owner, I got to keep the lights on. What do I pick? Can you walk us through that process that you would need to consider?
Yeah, I think one thing which we found was that it makes a lot more sense to raise a significant round as soon as possible. So rather than little piecemeal bits along the way, that doesn't get you to the point where you can go and hire the talent required to get you to the next level. If you're just trying to, feed things out in little bits, it can be quite difficult to do that. So you could do the cockroach strategy, they call it, where, it's very slow but steady sort of bootstrapping growth over time. Some people do that, the majority don't. So, it really depends on current traction, how much is it costing you to develop the product. But if you can, go bigger sooner rather than later. That's what I would certainly say. And in as early a round as possible. The later rounds, however, I probably would think is less important to go big. I mean, if you raise enough money in the early stages, you should be getting to a point where you have a product which people are paying for and you're getting some revenue, some runs on the board. So you should be at a point where, you can make some money from this thing. If you have to go and do subsequent rounds, there's a lot of different investors and there's a lot of capital available for that. But it comes back to how have you performed in the first round. So it's kind of about, you've got to make that first tranche work. It's got to be enough to get you to the point where you're selling your products and that you're making some revenue. And certainly I think in the Bitcoin space, a lot of people denominate their revenue in Bitcoin as well. When if the price goes up, it's like, cool, you make more money, right? So I would say, yeah, it's, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. There's something else that I also hear. Usually when you're trying to raise more money, and every single stage of the process, whether it's from angel to series A, B, C, and D, there's always going to be someone that you got to answer to. When you're raising more money, it means you have to give up more equity, maybe it's debt that you have to give up. And every single time, whether you're using a cockroach method to try and get more or a unicorn, the challenge is, how do I walk through that process of, should I get more equity to give out or should I give more debt? And during this experimentation phase where you're now on the accelerator, you're on Google, you're searching everything, and you're trying to manage 10 different things at the same time. From the very specific focus of, as a CEO and co-founder, what's the tipping point to say, this is my ideal valuation point, or how I'm valuing my money, this is how much I want to raise? What goes through your mind? And what's the walkthrough process that you can maybe share from your personal experience?
Here's how most startup companies come up with a valuation. They go, okay, yeah, it's going to be this number. They just sort of get a read on the wind and sort of what direction it is. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to, certainly in the early stages, right? Is nobody knows how to value this stuff. It's kind of like, what is the convincing value proposition and story which you can give to investors that it's a worthwhile usage of their money? And yes, it's a very high risk, first sort of stage. So yeah, I would say that there's not really any key metrics that you could perhaps sort of say for those early rounds. But certainly when it comes to debt, you mentioned debt or, what's the method, equity and so on. Convertible notes, I think, are a lot easier, whereby you can essentially get the money in the bank, get things sorted, and all of the admin stuff. We had like 6 months to do some of the admin tasks for, some sort of company structures. So that's a lot of time and sort of just brain power, which is wasted on filling out forms. So I think if you can do a convertible note, it kind of alleviates a lot of those things, because you can combine perhaps, you know, multiple notes into one, you know, equity distribution to shareholders at a later date. But it means that you can focus on doing what you're doing at the moment. So that's one thing. If you can do debt, fantastic. But usually we're talking later stage at that point. You know, we're talking Series B, perhaps. You know, when you have significant revenues coming in, people are willing to give you a loan. Probably banks won't give you a loan, but you know, other investors and that sort of stuff probably will. And if you can do that, fantastic, do it 100%. I think debt is the best way to do it. You don't want to give up as much equity as you can. So, but unfortunately, you reach this point where it's like, I need to keep the lights on. I need to pay the bills. And this guy's offering me this much. I've got no choice. So that's the position that sometimes people find themselves in the early rounds, when you're talking like, you know, 20 to 30% seed round or something like that, you know, of equity. And then maybe you've got angel round before that. And then maybe you do a Series A. So before too long, you know, half the company is owned by other people. So equity is the most expensive form of capital for a company. So you've got to be really careful with, you know, what you can do. And it basically comes down to how many people can you meet? What kind of convincing story can you say? How can you prove that you're going to do what you're going to do? And if you're good at conveying that to future investors, then, you know, as a founder, it's probably going to work out better for you.
Thanks for sharing that, George. I know that we're focusing a lot on financing and capital, but the specific reason is because we're seeing 7% unemployment here in Hong Kong. We're seeing 30 million people unemployed just in the US alone, or some other astronomical figure. So funding is always needed, whether you're a startup all the way up to a Series A or even to an IPO listed company. And the point I'm trying to get to is two ways that companies that go the traditional route is either using a comparables method or using a discounted cash flow method. But before you even get all that auditing figured out, what I'm trying to understand more about is how can you make use of the most important asset which you can give away for free, but also the most expensive. And that asset I define as time. You've got hiring decisions that you need to make. You've got existing fires that you're trying to put out. You've got a market that you're trying to test. You've got a numbers game trying to meet the right investor at the same time. So in that early stage, how did you manage your time in terms of effectiveness and also efficiency? Because time is the most important asset. Can you share a little bit more in that front?
Well, yeah, this is why I said that you've got to raise as much as possible as early as possible, because, you know, one of the mistakes you can make, and I think we did that, was raising smaller amounts along the way, whereby that doesn't really get you to the point where you need to be at to be able to hire the right people. So, and it's also a lot more time efficient, right? So if you're spending most of your week going and having coffees with investors who maybe have a 5% likelihood of signing a check, you know, what kind of usage of time is that when, you know, okay, you do that for 4 weeks, that's 4 weeks you could have been working on the product and growing the business. Now the time is ticking down a lot more. What choice do you have? The only choice you have is to try and raise the money to go and keep the lights on, right? So you're kind of in a catch-22 where it's like, I'd love to go and work on the product and the business, but literally can't because I need to pay wages next week. So you've got to balance that time. And I'd certainly, if you can find the right sort of investors at the early stages, I think that's really important. Another thing is, again, finding the right people rather than people that exist with money. That's another, you know, sort of important thing as well. Is often many people don't have the luxury in you know, when they first get into the business and knowing, well, who's the right person, who's not. But I think certainly somebody who understands your space, Bitcoin in this case, maybe they have prior investments in the space. Maybe they can connect you with other companies that can do stuff and buy your product. That certainly helps so much, rather than sort of going out to the market, explaining everything from scratch. If you have to explain Bitcoin to somebody, like every time you go and meet them, it's just a waste of time, right? So yeah, don't do that.
If we were to put even more spotlight into some metrics, there's 168 hours in a week. as a co-founder, you're lucky to maybe get 6 to 7 hours of sleep. So if we deduct, let's say 70 hours, you've got maybe 100 hours that you can fully utilize in a week. Let's say that 100 hours, you got to have some personal time, you got to detoxify something. If you had 100 hours and you took away 20% to maybe 30%, and you came up to maybe the final number of 60 to 70 quality hours that you have in a typical week. Typical hours for an average person is 40 hours. So you're lucky to have 70. If you could schedule your time in any way that you would, whether it's testing the market to pitching for investors to managing your team, how would you organize those magical 70 hours?
Well, I think everything at the back of your mind, every single stage when you're sitting in bed at night, it's how can I, keep the money coming in, right? It's like, how can I grow the product, grow the number of customers? How can I do that? So I think with those 70 hours or so, it kind of comes down to product development, perhaps, sales and marketing. How can you get the word out? How can you meet more people? Maybe find some strategic partners, people who want to use your product. Go and reach out, cold call. Everything should be about getting customers in the door, because as the CEO and founder, your job is to keep the lights on, and it's to grow the company and grow the team, and make sure that is a stable place to be. So I think that's what concerns 100% of your thoughts, whatever weekend or whatever. It should be focused on that, and that might mean then you've got to make the decision of, okay, do I need to travel to go and meet maybe investors or different product companies or whatever it might be? Maybe you do. I guess one benefit for being in the world that we are today is that everything is done over Zoom, just like this, right? So maybe it makes it a little bit easier to have those conversations, and people aren't a bit, people can be a bit stuck up about this kind of stuff, where it's like they want to meet you in person and physically have a coffee to waste your time rather than, a 1 hour Zoom call. So I think that if you can at least vet people, or your partners remotely, then that might be a time-saving thing for you as well. And think broadly as well. So, it's not just the Hong Kong market, it's the world. And I think every startup in Hong Kong should be thinking of that. And I think certainly all of the Bitcoin companies do, because it's it doesn't even come into your thinking that it's something that is only local to this market. It's like, no, it has to be global from day one. That's a given.
I think before we go into talking about Hong Kong, the benefits and maybe even areas of improvement, I think what you mentioned earlier is if you're working 70 hours a week and you're thinking 100% about Bitcoin or your business of how to pay salaries, how do you manage your stress? How do you compartmentalize? Because I've never seen you raise your voice. You've always been very calm. And that aura that the leader gives internally and externally to customers and employees is that culture, is that guiding force. How do you manage that stress and keep your composure, or try to keep composure?
I don't know. I mean, you have to, right? That's your job. As a founder, you have to be there every single day at the desk and with people, with your team. You can't afford to just have the day off, go on a holiday somewhere or do something like that, especially in the early days. It's like you have to be 100% focused there. So I think that comes back to you have to be composed as well, right? Like nobody wants to work with a crazy person, and nobody wants to work in an environment which makes them uncomfortable. So you've just got to try and I think hiring as well is important, and finding people that have the right cultural fit. Certainly we've done a lot of hiring over the years, and finding the right people is super important, right? That understand the culture. And this comes back to my point about if people already understand Bitcoin and how it works and all this kind of stuff, it's far more likely that culture within the company is going to work as well. If you have to train everything from day one with every single new person who comes on the team, it might be a bit of a stepping stone to get to that cohesive nature. But once you find the right people, it helps a lot. And then the question is, well, how do you find the right people? And again, it's like, go to the meetups, go to the Bitcoin Association meetups. That's where curious people go, who are interested in this space and perhaps want to know more or don't really know, what to do. So that would be, a gold mine of first place to look would be these kind of groups, places, online, whatever it might be, to try and find the right people. And it could be remote as well. Talent is global these days. So you've got to be able to look for, well, the best person for the job might not be standing in front of my face. They might not be within a 30-kilometer radius. They might be within a 3 million kilometer radius. So, you've got to, I think if you do have remote roles, then that's great. Put it out there, see what you get, see what kind of people sort of come through. You never know, it could be a winner.
I think the two key themes are people and culture, trying to set that so you're most comfortable being yourself. Not only do you have that expertise early on of just finding your hobby, testing it out, trying to find the right market, having as big of a potential round as possible so you can drive revenue is what helps you keep Bitspark running for so long. But before we go into the future, and I'm hoping to dabble a little bit more into your experiences in Hong Kong. I mean, you're not from Hong Kong, but you chose Hong Kong as a starting place because earlier you mentioned that there's a lot of financing, but it doesn't have as much financing as the US. But having been part of Hong Kong for so long, what benefits do you see that Hong Kong still has today at the end of July, approaching August 2020?
Well, Hong Kong is still the Bitcoin capital of Asia, in my opinion. Everyone who is in Bitcoin has some sort of presence here, right? And it's not just saying that, factually that is correct. You have all of the largest exchanges. You got BitMEX, you got FTX, you got Genesis Block, you've got, all of the Chinese exchanges also have offices in Hong Kong. Then you've got some of the other ones from around the world that, might have an incorporation here or have some sort of small team. So yeah, I mean, Hong Kong is objectively a great place with a lot of, Bitcoin companies that are already in this space, are already doing stuff. And why are they already there? Well, it's kind of like, if you have that ecosystem, it makes it a lot easier to grow, right? If it starts from zero and you're the only one, it's a lot harder. Whereas if there's already 10 people kind of who already get it, it becomes a lot easier because maybe there's different talent sort of moving between companies or whatever. So yeah, I would say that if people are looking to get into it in where we are in July, Hong Kong is still one of the premier sort of places. So I hope that answers it.
That music to my ears when we be part of the Bitcoin Association, but there's always areas that we can all improve. And having started your company here, if there was a way where you could have accelerated that growth, captured more market share, what elements would you have desired that maybe now that the Hong Kong government's focusing more on maybe creating jobs or being able to attract talent? With Hong Kong being objectively the financial center for Bitcoin, how can that startup journey be accelerated, in your opinion? And what support is needed?
Well, I think when we're talking about government, then it's kind of like, well, what kind of role does government play in a startup community to begin with? I would say, well, certainly with us, we've had many interactions with the Hong Kong government. We're part of Cyberport, their incubator back in the day, various accelerator programs and so on. So I get how it works, but I think one of the cool things about Hong Kong is that, there is no sort of government direction of, we're going to do this and everyone should apply and this is our Bitcoin policy or something like that. It doesn't exist, right? So it's kind of like sink or swim. But that creates an environment where you have a lot of quality companies. And, I think that's kind of the space where Hong Kong is at now. Where things can perhaps be better or what the government could do to help things, I think it's acknowledging what already happens in Hong Kong. You have several unicorns there, which don't even really get a mention in the local press, but they're worth billions of dollars and they're all Bitcoin companies. So I think that if the government was to look to do anything, it should be acknowledging what is already there and talking about it more and, getting the word out. I'm not really in favor of incentive programs or funding of this and that and blah, 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 applying for government money. Singapore does a lot of that, but let's look at the results of Singapore. It's just not as big of a crypto ecosystem. You've got maybe like a couple of local exchanges there. That's it. You know, you got a few funds, but you know, Hong Kong has like 10x that. So the whole sort of idea of, well, maybe the government needs some sort of incentive or you know, hand out money in some capacity. I don't really think so. I think it kind of comes down to marketing and being a place to be. And certainly when you're talking about unemployment rate that you're looking at before, like this is a boom area. Like you look at the Bitcoin price today, right? Like the things are going well.
10,000.
That's it. Last time ever, right? But yeah, it is a boom area, and acknowledge that and be like, wow, this is a boom area and we're going to own it. And we're going to be the best at this whole new boom area. Nobody's really done that convincingly around the world. And there's lots of different reasons why many, you know, governments don't want to do that. But I think there's no harm in acknowledging what already exists. So, you know, that certainly goes a long way.
Thanks for sharing that, George. As part of being part of the community for so long, when you announced that you recently started a new project and we should all start have a look, I was one of the first ones like, George, this is really cool. For the people that are just here, can you tell us more about the most recent project you're working on? What is it? What problem it solves? And why more people should be listening in?
Well, I'm working on a couple of different things at the moment, but sort of my key focus, I can't say too much about, but it certainly is going to be integrating crypto pretty heavily in what it does, which is going to be pretty awesome. So I want to be able to operate without bank accounts. Banks are terrible. Don't use a bank. You should just use crypto for everything that you need. So yeah, I think that's something going forward, which I'm going to incorporate into anything else that I do. Is yeah, don't try and rely on the banking system. So yeah, there's that. I recently launched a website called thelaundry.money, which was kind of like a fun side project, which you might see on my Twitter. But that was essentially, it's a data set of financial crimes that happen around the world, focusing on the banking system. So one thing that I noticed in working in the remittance world, and certainly you see this in Bitcoin world as well, is there's a lot of focus on compliance, right? So lots of companies have compliance programs, and people are, the press maybe is concerned, oh, Bitcoin, you know, what are their compliance programs like? In most cases, Bitcoin compliance programs are way better than what you would find at local banks. And, you know, quote me on that, like that's true. So, you know, who really has some of the lapses in this? And let's look at the data. So I created a website that really catalogs, you know, some of the stuff which banks get up to, which, shall we say, is not ideal. That's one cool project. I'm helping out with also some webinars that are coming out soon, some courses on the topic of money moving via cryptocurrencies. So I'm working with IMTC, who's the International Money Transfer Conference. I worked a lot with them in the past. I've been a speaker there. And they're pretty much the largest remittance organization in the world. So, so yeah, creating some Bitcoin sort of focused, crypto focused, you know, content for them as well, on how does money move? How can it be better than using SWIFT or the local banking system or something like that? So watch this space.
Thanks for sharing that. This is a question that might be sensitive because it's a very sensitive space that you're in. So if you want to prepare for that question and respond to that later on, I'm also okay with it. But the question is on data. We know that data is very sensitive, how you acquire it, how do you challenge or validate certain data sets. If you're talking about the traditional and existing banking environment, what are ways that you can add validity and verify that the data that you're using it is trustworthy?
Well, that's a big question. It kind of depends how you want to look at it, right? Like certainly in what I did with the website, which I launched, you know, that looks at data from regulators. So it's like from their website, like what are the fines which they're dishing out to different companies, who are they, and quantifying that and putting that on a database. So, you know, this is data which, one of the things, the problem with a lot of financial data is just getting access to it is super hard, and things which shouldn't be hard is. So, okay, let's say you care about the wheat price today, right? Like, okay, go online and find like wheat price, and then find an awesome chart about that and something that's interactive. Often you'll find that you have to have like a Bloomberg terminal link, or you have to pay a bunch of money for some service to get access to some of this data, and it's just way harder than it should be. Like if I look up Tesla stock, I can get awesome interactive charts. I can look at previous time frames. I can, candlestick, line, whatever you want, can be there. But some of this data is just locked away, doesn't exist. And for whatever reason, nobody is bringing that to the fore. So I think that's an interesting space to get into. And if anyone's out there thinking of a business idea, there's a cool website called Quandle who try and like make data and charts available for all these different weird things around the world, particularly in the financial area. Like I said, the wheat price. But yeah, I think, data and verifying if it exists, like there are a lot of authorities on data which you can draw from, but the composability of that data, the ability to extract it, in an automated manner is just non-existent. So people build web scrapers and all these different crazy different things to try and get this data. So yeah, I think there is a space out there for somebody to try and make that easier than it currently is.
Thank you for sharing that. While we're still in the present moment, we had a question from John. Are you able to share the website link that you're currently working on? And also that second link right now into the chat, so that anybody that's viewing this and listening can immediately maybe look at this. So after we finish part 3, the final part, which is the future, when we open this up to the public, they might be able to ask more insightful questions that they're very curious about. So would it be possible you can maybe share that link right now to everyone in the group?
Yep, hold on. I can type message here. There you go. It's just
the laundry.money.
It's a great domain.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Probably have an offline chat on how you came up with that story as well. But in the interest of time, we're going slightly over. I think I'm keen to maybe understand more about how the audience who's present today or even in the future might be able to assist you in your journey. You're talking about in the past, maybe funding, trying to find the right person. You're trying to find ways to maybe grow the market share or finding a team, because even here in New Zealand, we're having this Zoom conference over here. So to summarize, what is your ask and how might people today or in the future be able to accelerate your ask and help you out?
Do you mean, how people would be able to get started and find a team and so on?
It's more for a personal question for you, George. You've been very gracious with your time. You've been helpful with the community. For the people that might not know you, we hope that the association can also give back to members like yourself who've given so much. If I could phrase it more specifically, is what do you need, or what help does George need to accelerate you to reach the next level?
Yeah, well, I think any entrepreneur is interested to hear from people which have a passion for this space and have an idea or something that that they would like to help out with, or expertise in some specific area. Because finding the right people is so hard. Like, yeah, it's people say, oh, finding the right people is great, and it's kind of like this fluffy, nebulous thing. But it is super important to have a solid team who knows what they're doing. Because if you don't, like, it doesn't matter how much money you raise, like, it'll flop over. So having the right people on board is super important. So if anybody has any specific expertise, interested to work on the next, Bitcoin, crypto sort of projects, do get in touch. They're on Twitter at George_Harrap, part of the Bitcoin Association as well. So yeah, you can email them and we'll get in contact as well. So yeah, sort of anyone that has any specific expertise that would sort of be interested in this space.
Thanks, George. I've just typed out your Twitter link, so if anybody wants to reach you out faster and directly, they can reach out to you directly. I've gone over slightly over, so I apologize for going over the time, but Arthur has actually got 2 questions for you. One of them is, what is the biggest learning competing with the fiat-based digital wallets? And the second one is, what is your experience serving the Filipino customers in Hong Kong? I think the second one will need more clarification, but I guess the first one, it's all up to you to clarify.
A good question. So what's the biggest learning competing with fiat-based wallets and HK? They're not really competitors because, you know, they focus on a specific niche. So you look at these stored value facilities in Hong Kong, right? What are they doing? Firstly, they're not banks. Secondly, they're reliant on a bank. Thirdly, many of them transfer money, but it's through some sort of intermediary at wholesale prices. That means that they are subject to certain rates and certain currencies that they can access, right? So they can't go and do Sri Lankan rupee tomorrow. Why? It's because their partner who they work with doesn't do it, right? So they're only limited to the high volume corridors, like let's say Hong Kong to the Philippines, but everyone does that, right? It's a race to zero in that corridor. So they're not making money on that. And certainly in the money transfer space, what have always been so interested in is there are 180 currencies in the world and only about 30 of them that you can have in a bank account. What about the other 150? What about digitizing the other 150? How do people receive money in those currencies? Because let's say you have a cool fiat wallet in Hong Kong. Cool. Okay. You want to send money to Sri Lanka? Okay. Who's going to give you Sri Lankan rupee? HSBC isn't. You know, local remittance providers probably aren't. And even if they are, they're using someone else to deliver the money. How is the person going to get the money out at the other end? Probably via cash, because that's what the majority of the world uses. When we talk about payment methods and everyone's like, oh, digital, cash is used by like a factor of 1,000 times more than every other payment method in the world, right? So it's like, it's not even a question. So the question is, well, how are you going to deliver the cash? So I would say that what we sort of found was a viable, you know, business in Hong Kong is focusing on the on and off ramps into the crypto ecosystem, because as crypto grows, there is a need for people who interface with the real world. You can have a fancy derivative exchange that's only Bitcoin only and this kind of stuff. Cool. But how are people going to get in? They need to go somewhere first. Now that might be Genesis Block, which is a great example, you know, which can handle local currencies. But you know, it's not everywhere, right? So it's got to be, you've got to be able to have a product that works everywhere in all of these different fiat on and off ramps. And they're hard because they're all different all over the world. On the second point, really quickly, you know, Philippines, Hong Kong, I mean, that's a huge market, 360,000 people sending money back. It's like $600 million a year. However, a lot of people they're using apps a lot more nowadays. It's probably the majority of transfers these days, but there's still a lot of transfers that happen in person over the counter. And even if you use an app, a lot of what happens in Hong Kong is they subsidize the initial cost of the app and then ramp the fees up over time. We've seen that like 3 times with different virtual apps in Hong Kong. So like, yeah, it might be a thing now, but check back in 10 months and sort of see if people are still sending money that way. So Philippines is a very cash market. Hong Kong is a very cash market. Ultimately, cash is king. So yeah, I think focusing on those areas, whether it be for money transfers or whether it be on and off ramps, that's the important thing to solve. And I think P2P also comes into this as well, you know, without having to necessarily go to a location. You know, if you can connect people together who want to trade like things, then that's great.
Thank you, George. Arthur, hopefully that answers your question. If anybody else has any questions here, please feel free to ask or even to type them out. John has another question. Do you have anything on the back burner project-wise for DeFi?
Yes. I think DeFi is super cool. And a lot of people say Bitcoin was the first DeFi. Okay, I get it. But in general, like if you want Bitcoin to eat the world, the financial system and all the different products need to be built on crypto to do that. So DeFi goes a long way of doing that. I just a side note, I got a loan on DeFi, which I get paid for the loan because it's like, it's net positive. So usually you pay interest on a loan. This one, like they're paying me. And then I use that to fund my rent and expenses for the next 3 months here. So that's great, right? So these are some of the cool things which are possible in the DeFi world that you can do, which would be completely ridiculous in traditional finance world, the whole new world.
Is that compound you're referring to?
Compound, yeah, yeah. So I pay myself 6% on getting that loan, and then I made 2.6% on the arbitrage. So like I can keep that loan in existence and completely pay it back, right? Like it can be in existence for years. We'll see what the rates are, but that's pretty cool, right? Where I just made like I get paid to, imagine if you did that for a house. You get paid to buy a house. That's crazy, right? You buy a car. I told the CEO of Coin Corner on Twitter the other day. He was like, I need to buy a car. And I was like, you should go and pay yourself to buy a car and use Compound. So, and you can use Bitcoin collateral for that as well. So that's super cool, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. From your perspective, having run a company that probably has very high scrutiny for security and cybersecurity in general, for somebody who's non-technical and layperson, where can they get skilled up to have more knowledge on how to better protect themselves? Because yes, Compound sounds good. Everybody's talking about it, but it's so easy to maybe fall for the wrong project. In general, is there maybe one or two areas you can share on how to minimize our risk?
Yeah, I mean, risk management in the crypto world is, it all comes back to only invest what you're willing to lose, right? So I would say, firstly, start off with that. That's a good point to be. And once you really understand, you know, how everything works, the underlying risks, you know, different exposures that you might be, then you can maybe adjust your risk strategy. But certainly I always say to people, whether it's a new sort of Bitcoin exchange or product or whatever, like just try it out, see how it works. Because often, like, we can have a conversation for an hour about some new product, but until you actually go and use it, it doesn't really click. So I think that's the important thing, is just use it, put in, I don't know, $10 or something just token to see how it works. Like just use that for a while, and then, you know, you can up your comfort level from there. It's kind of a generic response, but really it is true. Like, don't go all in on anything on day one. Yeah, sort of ramp it up over time once you understand more. Because certainly if you're doing stuff, you don't know what you're doing, that's bad. Don't do that.
Thanks for sharing that. I think another one of the major initiatives I'm trying to push out at the Bitcoin Association is the Electronic Trading Committee, modeled after the FinTech Association in Hong Kong, where they've got a blockchain association, lead compliance and legal. What I see a big part of the Electronic Trading Committee is figuring out how to be more consistent with your profits and having that mental aptitude to take the profits and minimize your losses. You mentioned earlier in your days when you were mining that you also prepared a software or something where you were sort of trading. From your 6 years or more than 6 years now, all 9 years almost of trading experience, what can you recommend in terms of how to minimize that risk of yours in terms of stop loss, taking profits, and just general tools you're using to maybe trade more successfully?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I ask myself that every day, right? I'm certainly not a trader. You know, I do dabble in a lot of that kind of stuff, but I'm in no ways a professional in that sort of space. So I would defer to the professionals in that area. Like, yes, you know, stop loss is very important. You know, there's lots of different risk strategies, so don't go 100x leverage on everything. You know, so yeah, there's a lot of different things which you can do to manage your risk, and it's all about sort of taking things very, very slowly and sort of going from there, because it's all very well to make a few winning trades, but then it's the last trade which really makes you, and maybe that can wipe you out totally. So certainly from an entrepreneur's perspective, it's more focused on building, you know, than trading. Like, even if you're building a trading company, like, still your day-to-day is not trading itself, it's building that company. So yeah, it's certainly important to keep a focus on what's important and what's sort of side to that.
Focusing on that theme of building, what type of team would you look for as a startup? I mean, there's that Triple H where you have that hacker, the hipster, the hustler. But if you're just starting out, what would be a dream team in your opinion?
probably like the best used car salesman would be great because they can sell anything. So you want to find people that that are good at what they do and can perhaps apply that skill. You know, I know a lot of my friends who are entrepreneurs. They're bringing in people into the Bitcoin space, which have been in maybe finance for years, right? So they're not Bitcoin people, but they understand how all of these different derivatives work. So, okay, great. You know, so it's more about finding the right people with the right skill sets more than it is, you know, can you tell me, you know, what the average block time is or something like that, right? So that's, I think, an important thing to keep in perspective. So again, it comes back to what can you offer and what can you show and demonstrate that you're good for the role. And coming back to what you said earlier about, you know, unemployment rates and stuff like that, if anyone's out there, they want to get into this space, like apply with a job ad that, like, nobody in the Bitcoin space cares about your university, like literally 0 people. So do not put that on your resume. Put something interesting on the resume that makes you stand out from the rest of the people. What have you done in this space? You know, what have you, maybe you've, I don't know, done a course on Udemy or something on how Bitcoin works, or how you've maybe built a website that's one of these free websites you can do pretty easily. Whatever it is, put that on there, because that is worth like 10 times more than anything else. And that will put you right at the top versus, you know, somebody who doesn't. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of generic sort of resumes which come by. It's like, I did this and I went to this university, and well, nobody cares. Like, you've got to, you've got to focus on, you know, what can you bring to the table?
Thanks for sharing that. I think another thing that I'm seeing in this space is it evolves so quickly. Yesterday's hot, the new shiny thing is literally not that hot in the next hour. So keeping up in this space is extremely challenging, even for myself. I've been looking at this quite closely for 3 years. As a new founder and CEO who usually has to adapt with a very rapidly changing environment where you have very big players, how do you have some pointers on how you might be able to stay ahead of the curve or even continue being relevant? Because it's so fluid, this industry.
Yeah, spend a couple of hours every morning looking at this stuff. That's what I've said to a couple of people recently, is the ROI for understanding what's going on right now in the crypto space is super high. You know, it's probably some of the best usage of time which you can have right now is spend like an hour or two every morning or every weekend, spend, you know, a couple of hours, research everything, go and look, what are people talking about? How does it work? Maybe go and try it out. Like, that will put you in the top 0.1% of people who know what's going on. And that's a good place to be. So yeah, I would say make some time to go and understand what's going on, because it'll be certainly worth your while. I've found that, you know, since I've been here as well, is I spend a couple of hours every day, if not more than a couple of hours, just going through what's already happening, because it's happening so fast. And, you know, that's been working out pretty well. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. In terms of sources of information, I used to laugh at Twitter and say, I'm not American. That place has got, it's an echo chamber. You don't need to look at it. But I'm starting to see some pretty good content on there and people to follow. Two-part to my question. The first part is, are there some inspiring people that you'd like to follow on Twitter that you can share? And the second one is more along of, if you're spending so much time every single day, where do you start? Do you start with Telegraph, or how do you just prep?
Yeah, good question. I think in the sort of Twitter sphere, I think, again, the ROI on Twitter itself is also pretty high as well. Like, I also know many people who've got hired through Twitter. Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, like, there's probably a lot of people in my tweet stream who I'm retweeting every now and then, maybe, which are worth following in the crypto space. You know, so I would just implore people to go and have a look, you know, what kind of people are out there. If it's just people talking about, you know, various coins, or, you know, showing a picture of a chart, that's not really that useful of content. But there are, you know, people out there which are providing sort of, you know, some good insights on that. And sorry, the second part of the question was?
On you mentioned earlier that you spend a couple hours every day or even over the weekend, just trying to keep yourself updated.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
having information overloaded every single day, what questions do you ask on which source should I be referring today, and which source of information can I maybe search for myself or yourself?
Yeah, I mean, doing this for quite a while, I have a good filter on what's good and what's total nonsense. So again, firstly, I think Twitter's a good place. Telegram is also a good place. So there's like the Bitcoin Association Telegram, or whatever other groups it might be. Try and talk to the people in the space as well. Go to the meetups, go and meet them. Once you're at that point, you'll probably have connections to a bunch of different places. And then from there, when you see the new content coming in, you can then vet it according to certain standards of which you have. So, if it's talking about some brand new thing, then, if you've been looking at these things for, I don't know, review 10 projects a day or every weekend, if a new thing comes along, you're going to be in a better position to go, is this like nonsense or is it good? And, once it's just a numbers game, right? Just do that a lot and you'll get good at it. And then you'll be able to zoom in on the insights. Wow. Okay. Yep. That is a real thing. And that's a real problem. And I think that's going to be a success or not.
And it's almost like you're just organically searching for things and topics that you're interested in, from mining to trading to trying to figure out how to start your own remittance company. I do apologize for taking up so much of your time and asking all the questions. I saw that Pete also joined as well. So well, I've got my lemon tea, but just in case if anybody else here has any more questions, we do have just about 10 minutes left before time is up. So I also do want to really open up the space for anybody else that does have any questions. If you feel comfortable typing, you can also please do so.
Hi, George. Hi.
Hi.
Hey, we've met briefly in Hong Kong in one of the meetups, and thanks for sharing. And a quick question for you: did you ever get legally harassed by the regulators or other firms in Hong Kong in your journey with Bitspark?
Well, good question. I can't say too much on that, but I can say that
Okay.
there has been interest from various regulators in what we do, and it's all about making sure that what you do is something which fits within something which they understand. The good thing about Hong Kong is that there's no explicit like Bitcoin regulation, right? So a lot of the different companies, they either say, look, I am facilitating an online digital service that involves Bitcoin only, and therefore I'm not an SVF because I don't store Hong Kong dollars. Great, that's how many of the derivatives exchanges work, and they get left alone for the most part. But yeah, it's all about Hong Kong's a great place where it's pretty open in what you can do. It's all about making sure that your product is within this sort of frame. In the case of Singapore, that's not the case, right? Whereas Singapore is just like every crypto thing needs to do X and needs to have a license. And even if you're a wallet, you need a license or various other silly things. So you don't need that in Hong Kong, which is way better. And that's why it's a hub and Singapore's not.
But then can I follow up on that question? Because sometimes when you are in the remittance business, the Hong Kong regulators also require to understand your partner on the other side, on the receiving end. So legally in Hong Kong, you're not holding money, but the other side.
Sorry, sorry, I just got to interrupt. I just want to be very clear that part of the reason why we're also being cautious that this is also being recorded. This is a public forum, and this will be uploaded online to a public audience. So just again, I just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with their questions and what they're asking. So sorry to interrupt. Just want to make that clear.
Yeah. So on the case of remittance, I mean, how a lot of Bitcoin companies work is that they are not remittance companies themselves, right? They are on and off ramps. So, you might want to look to structure a remittance company globally as, a P2P place where people can go and buy Bitcoin and they can go and sell it, but you're not the one who is giving authority to pay out X amount at the other end. As long as it's of a rate, there's 2 transactions involved. there's Bitcoin, you know, in the middle. You know, I think a lot of companies would find that that would fit within a lot of the remittance regulations, because you're not actually a remittance company in that case. You're just buying and selling Bitcoin. That's what you're doing. So yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Arthur. Is there anybody else here that is got any questions? We are running short on time. If you have a question, you really want to ask it, now's your time. Going once, going twice. Price target.
Price target. Moon, 300,000 kilometers away. That's where we're going. That's all I can say on that. I certainly would not want to say something like the last time under 10K, because yeah, that's not a winning trade.
Thank you for that, Kristen. If there's anybody else who wants to reach out to George, his Twitter account is @George_Harrap with 2 R's. This will also be made public, so if anybody wants to view this, please do follow through. If you are wanting to learn more about the Bitcoin Association, you can always email us. You can go to our website, bitcoin.org.hk. The whole purpose of this is to understand more about prominent individuals like George, to understand his unique story, the past, present, the future, and really to try and inspire a little bit of hope into Hong Kong, which is going through a pretty challenging time. To everybody who's joining today, really thank you for joining. If you have anything, connect with George, or if you want to send me an email or connect via Twitter as well, please feel free to do so. I don't have anything else from my side, but thank you all for joining. And again, thank you so much, George, for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, and thanks everyone, you know, in the chat and everyone who watched the recording at a later date as well. So yeah, reach out to the Bitcoin Association. They're awesome. I'm on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. It's just search George Harrap into Google and you'll find some remnant of me. So there you go.
Thank you. We're also going to be checking out thelaundry.money.
The best website you ever see.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, and stay tuned for the next session.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.